Today's chat features conversations with workplace professionals on authentic writing and communication tasks and how we as teachers can better prepare students for the workplace. Enjoy.
I'm Gabe. I'm the city engineer with the city of Bismarck. So my primary responsibilities would be the planning, design, and construction of municipal infrastructure in the city of Bismarck. That ranges from water mains to sewer mains and roads and streets and bridges and sidewalks and stormwater detention ponds, lighting system signals. Those are the things that are under my purview.
I have been at Great Plains Microsoft for, it's been over 25 years. And I work in finance. So I've held a number of different roles within Great Plains Microsoft. I started out in support, and my focus continues to be a lot on project management, process improvement, and standardizing processes across our finance area.
My name is Mark Sarir, and I am the engineering manager of a agricultural company out of Hudson, Wisconsin called Harvest Tech. So we design and manufacture agricultural aftermarket solutions for the hay forage industry. We're doing add-on accessories and things like that for hay balers and forage harvesters and everything like that. And then on the side, a part-time is I'm a youth ministry leader at our church.
Yeah, so right now I'm working at the hospitals in Bismarck, so I bounce back and forth between CHI and Sanford.
What kind of writing tasks are you engaged in on a day-to-day basis?
So for day-to-day basis, it's mostly correspondence and project coordination on a day-to-day basis in terms of receiving direction or input from the public or the commissioners or your elected officials, and then kind of guiding your staff to then accomplish what those goals and objectives are. That's the day-to-day basis types of writing that I would engage in.
A lot of writing that I have is very directed at a smaller audience. So I think about a lot of what I do is daily emails. We use Microsoft Teams now a lot, PowerPoint, things like that.
It's become a lot more as I've kind of worked up into a different position at my job, managing the engineering area of our workplace. And so a lot of what I do is technical writing. So descriptive, whether it's if I'm working with employees, it's having to explain a project or be able to articulate that clearly so that they understand what they need to do. The flip side of that would be in our design side. We work with a lot of subcontractors where we have third-party people that do our software. We have third-party fabricators that are doing kind of our system fabrication.
So my writing is, the things that are really important are getting to the point, clarity, anticipating what the next question is going to be so that I can potentially answer that and we don't have to bounce things back and forth. And, I guess those are kind of some of the key things that I think about when I'm writing.
Job-wise, it's pretty much expected for me to be able to document any sort of patient encounter that I have. So rounding on a patient in the morning, I have to make a progress note, which would include not only like the history, but also whatever physical exam or actual objective stuff that's required, and come up with a plan and articulate all of that. So hopefully whoever was reading it, it's as good as if they were in the room to be able to follow what was happening.
What I'm hearing is you're kind of writing a combo of expository, but there's an element of narrative in there that you're trying to paint the picture.
And I think for maybe like one really good example that I can think of is even just like, so if I'm doing any sort of physical exam, my very first statement is just the general statement. So as I walk in the room and see the patient for the first time, how can I sum up in maybe 3 sentences how that patient is doing just from looking at them. You know, for a peds patient, are they crying in their mother's arms? Do they look pale? Are they, you know?
We have people that are doing, so we've got like our service department that's handling maybe the technical literature, so the manual creation, some assembly instructions. So I'm supporting those people, and so a lot of times they're creating the documents, and I may be doing more of like proofing it or giving them technical support if they've got questions on it. A lot of it is email, and trying to connect those dots as well, because someone who's writing the manual might not have farm experience, and so there's even some of that understanding, which I'm really thankful having an agricultural background. So I do have a little bit of an understanding there to be able to span some of those gaps, which sometimes that is a challenge as well.
Speaking language.
Yeah, when I'm trying to write to something that I don't understand, that's a challenge as well.
You know, one thing to think about too is we have a very global team. So some of our emails may be read when I'm not even awake, you know, by someone in Singapore, for example. And so that's where the clarity becomes even more important. And like I talked about, kind of anticipating the next question or what's coming up, because they can't necessarily ping me on an instant message, ask for clarification. They would have to then send it to me. I might not get it until they're sleeping, and, you know, that time kind of back and forth.
If we see a new market segment that we are maybe trying to fill, it would be maybe going out and specifically asking farmers, you know, what would this look like to be able to fill that for you?
So you really are looking at what is the problem or need of these specific people, and then how can we design a specific response to fill that need?
Yeah, exactly. And right now, especially in agriculture, it's a tough time for a lot of people. And so we've actually just kind of come through an interesting kind of season for our business of, we had some high-end systems that realistically wasn't a need for people. And so we had to kind of shift a little bit to, what do you actually need? What are you willing to pay for? Because realistically, they're not able to pay for something super crazy. Even if it would be nice, it just isn't realistic.
How do you adjust your writing for your audience?
The level and I guess professionalism of the writing certainly goes up a couple levels when you're community director of a DOT and soliciting for projects or something, rather than responding to an email from a concerned citizen about a signal that's out or a sidewalk that needs to be repaired, and just knowing what the audience is for that writing style.
It looks a little bit different for each one of those industries. Particularly, I would say probably even the education level that all of those have received, and then the end customer is a farmer, you know, and so I feel like you need to be able to choose how you're talking to these people and how you're communicating with them.
In most of the writing, I mean, the core of all the writing is still a technical basis. It's still taking a very technical issue, and then whether or not you are writing to another technical writer themselves and a technical reader to say, I can keep this very, you know, engineer speak, and I can keep this very much on a technical basis because you are the person I'm trying to convey what I'm trying to, you know, communicate. And you're also a technical person. So let's get into the details about how this operations and maintenance plan of the stormwater detention pond is supposed to work. I'm taking that same issue about that same stormwater detention pond where the public says it's not draining, it's always full of water. I'm still doing that technical analysis to understand what the issue is and what the problem solving is. But when I communicate that to the person, I'm not using the same level of technical jargon. I'm saying, yeah, it was plugged. You're right. We'll go and fix it. That's all that I would need to say. And that satisfies the communication need that they had.
Yeah. So the huge thing is terminology, is changing or making sure that every little detail is explained in as simple a terms as possible, but also hopefully kind of still being succinct at the same time. Safety to whatever's going on. We go through whatever was written instructions, but make sure that we're answering whatever questions might be at the time too.
How do you keep things like that succinct?
Very careful language choice. And I mean,
okay, so that diction.
The day-to-day is mostly those quicker, responding to a concerned citizen type thing. If we are getting into that traffic operations report or signal optimization or an environmental clearance for this alternatives analysis of what we're doing to make some new highway on the other side of town, that's certainly that technical writing, but it also just gets back to that knowing who your audience is. And maybe the harder ones are the technical writing that it's supposed to be for the public, but you don't really know what the level of understanding the public has on something, because you could have the member of the public who's a trained engineer who's just a member of the public, or you can have a member of the public that has really no idea what you're trying to do at all. So trying to use the correct language and the correct way to communicate to those very different audiences is somewhat challenging.
I think being able to communicate with all those different audiences and understanding that they're really good at what they do. It's really hard for me when someone tries to talk to somebody else like I know their job better than they do, and I don't. And so I think just approaching that from a humble standpoint of, hey, there's a problem. I don't fully understand your process. You probably don't fully understand mine. So kind of being willing to listen in that communication, specifically in the writing portion of it, just asking questions, I think is always really valuable and something that I've found to work really well because it helps me understand things a lot better too.
When I coach people on, let's say creating a presentation, I always tell them, think about your audience, because you're going to present the information differently to a senior leader versus, maybe team members that you have on the ground. Because your senior leader might, just want the very high level points. Maybe you put the data in the appendix. And then again, depending upon the senior leader, like we have a senior leader who will see like the first 2 bullet points and then drill into the detail. So it's really important to know your audience and tailor your writing to them.
And certainly we'll try to do, whether it's an executive summary or it's something with a certain amount of graphics in it, so that the lay reader that just wants to pick up something and get to the point, or even the elected official that wants to know without reading this 50-page document, well, what do I need to know in the first 3 pages? Getting to the point of it, getting those actionable items. And then if there's that technical person that wants to dig into, well, why did you say that? Well, there's 40 more pages, and then there's an appendix with 100 pages of all the technical readouts. If you really want to get into it, it's all there, but we try to make sure that document itself can serve multiple readers' needs.
Right. Yeah, it definitely changes it, and being able to effectively write for those different audiences has probably helped be able to work up in a position of just being able to do that effectively.
One thing that I would concentrate on is the organizational skills. So putting together your thought process is often important. And then kind of it goes back to the rereading too, because if you reread it and it's not organized, if you're jumping all over from thought to thought, that makes it difficult for the person who's receiving the communication. And then again, to the clarity point, making sure that you've got succinct next steps or action items, because you can often send off an email and then, people go, okay, that's great information, but are you going to take the action? Am I going to take the action? That type of thing. So I think things that would help prep is just maybe getting in the practice of some of these, organizational skills.
And certainly there is quite a bit of that baked into project-based learning or projects that teachers are doing, of deadlines and due dates and who in your group is responsible for what piece of information. But I do think, I can only speak for myself, I think I could be more deliberate and intentional about how I am sharing with students of why this is important. And like just be a little bit more intentional about, this is the communication skill that we're working on by you having to do this task.
The concept that I use a lot of just how to approach writing differently. I think is something that makes me somewhat successful when I try to write something, that I don't have the same tried and true, oh, I need to always outline this thing. You know, sometimes it's just typing something out and seeing what sticks, and then knowing that you can reformat all this around. And I think knowing now and moving forward that things on a computer are different than me trying to write out a paragraph on my pen, because then I get kind of frustrated. You really have to think about what the next step is and how this next paragraph is going to lead to this next thing, that when I'm typing things up on a computer, it's more of a, hey, I have a good thought. I'm going to throw this down at the bottom of the page. I just need to integrate this in somewhere. Here's my 10 good thoughts. And it's almost like forming those into the writing as it happens, as opposed to trying to really have that outline structured in your head before you even sit down to start typing or writing.
Yeah, I think the other thing that comes to mind too is, again, the project work and working together, because I know, well, when I went to high school, you know, a bajillion years ago, you know, it seemed like it was so much individual work, right?
Yeah.
And there was some project work, and I, you know, just see kids struggling a little bit because they feel like they have to do it themselves, but you know, be able to reach out and ask for help and be collaborative. And I think that teachers are doing a lot better now with integrating that project work into the classroom and making sure that others are able to work together, and then be able to give and receive feedback and not take it personally. That's a huge one. So, you know, if I tell you, you know, that came across that you were, you know, just crabby or something, you know, to be able to go, okay, I'm not going to take it personally. That's, you know, just something that I need to adjust and, you know, reword or whatever.
How often do you do even semi-formal to formal presentations or have to present information to other people?
I would think you are always presenting your ideas, and you're always trying to communicate those ideas, even if it's an internal team meeting, just to be able to, I have this great idea, but if I can't articulate that to even my boss or my coworker or my associate of why we should take this project in this, you know, left direction instead of right, you might be the smartest engineer in the world, but if you can't tell anyone that you're the smartest engineer because you can't communicate that, then it's really, you'd be very frustrating not having a complete set of skills that you can articulate and convince other people and listen, and maybe you don't get all of your ideas forward, but certainly it's more than just doing math and doing science makes a good engineer. That said, if that's all you want to do, there's roles in the engineering world for that, but the most successful types of engineers are going to be the ones that have multiple skill sets that can blend all those things together.
That's something that I've had to start doing more of as well, as we come out with new products, and we have very close relationships with major OEMs. And so if they are looking at integrating one of our systems into their major machine in the factory, they're going to look at that very critically. And so for us to present that information, so I have had to start doing quite a bit more with presentations and be able to try and show that, you know, this is a good product and why it's a good product, and make that clear and thorough, but yet concise, because the people that I'm working with don't have a lot of time.
Whether it's a presentation to a colleague on a research topic or whatever it might be, and even how to articulate that information and even arrange it. I mean, if you think about even those basic skills, I mean, those are things that speech help with. And even like right now with where I'm at, doing more of that kind of practicing the rounds or practicing how you talk to colleagues, you'd be surprised at how much those skills kind of readily transfer over, that you're able to remember some of those key bits of information that you really need to cover and are able to articulate that. A lot of the times too in speech, you know, there's a particular way to do things, and that's kind of the same way for medicine. So you develop that kind of pattern.
To some extent, having a clear first this, then this, then this, whether it's in a speech form or in an essay form, is a helpful framework that you can then use to adapt and plug in the holes.
Yeah, and even just getting in some of those habits like claim warrant impact or something like that. I mean, even laying out like, you know, we need to watch for these signs, or if this thing happens, then we need to do this in order to address this concern down the road, and those type of things. it really helps to lay out at least your thought process. So hopefully it's a little bit clear what's going on, or saves a phone call from another person wondering, why the heck are you thinking about this?
Were there any tasks either that you did that actually were kind of helpful, or as you think about the writing that you do on a day-to-day basis, is there anything that you kind of wish you would have known or had a little bit of practice doing before you were thrown into a career?
For me, interpersonal skills of being able to, again, that communication is obviously a very close aspect of that, but being able to relate to people and with people and have those conversations and communicate has really been, it's meant a lot for me. And whether it's my role at church or my role in the workplace, it really has paid dividends in a lot of different ways. So
Sure. And I approach it mostly, thankfully, once I got into a profession, all of my communicating is being supplemented with figures or tables or graphics. And so I'm not trying to craft the most perfect paragraph that somehow describes what is very much data. It's just data. And hey, maybe I could just give this data out here and then have a paragraph that then supports that data. Or if I have a figure, I can't just put a picture out there without explaining some bubbles or some information, or like, well, what's the legend look like? What does this map, if it's a map or something like that, need to show? So I'm viewing writing as the component that goes along with the visual arts to create this communication package that I want it to be able to stand alone and read it. But it's not just a paragraph. It's a paragraph with a table. It's a paragraph with a figure. It's a graph. It's a scatter plot. It's something that helps inform the reader of what I'm trying to, I guess, communicate to them. I've liked that better than trying to think of how am I going to do a 6-page words only. That's just like, oh, that still almost terrifies me. Like, oh gosh, how am I supposed to do this? That's so many words. You start putting paragraphs in there with a figure, and you put this graphic that just kind of breaks it up, and it certainly makes it easier as the reader to read through it. And it's easier for me to communicate, not trying to find the perfect word that really, if I could just show this picture of the signal standard that's rusted out at the bottom, that's a better way to inform the reader what I'm trying to communicate than going through all the detailed paragraph to get to the same point.
Looking back at it now, and I think back to some of the, I might have not enjoyed them as much at the time, but even just like, almost like those Extemp style questions where it's like you flip them over and you just saw them for that first time, and now I have to write a cohesive thought, even if it's not like a perfect, exactly how you want it, 100% essay or whatever it might be, but at least coherently articulate those thoughts in a short time frame.
So one thing that comes to mind is kind of in this age of instant communication is take a step back when you've written something and review it. And I find myself doing that, even today when I was writing an email, there were a couple corrections that I made as I reread it to make it more clear and then to correct mistakes. And I think in the age of instant communication, we often just write and send. And that's a dangerous practice, because not only can something be, misinterpreted, but it can be incorrect as well. Yeah. You could mean 1 million and, you wrote 1,000 or vice versa. Yeah. So I think with some of the younger generation coming in, and it's important for all of us, but I'm just thinking they're so used to now, the instant communication, take a step back, review it.
Yeah. For me, it's probably a lot of it on the technical side, which is probably more engineering discipline related. And so, yeah, there are a lot of times where I'm trying to more understand technical phrases, terms, how to communicate that properly. And so it's hard I feel like at the high school level is a lot more general, than when you start getting into college disciplines, or where you start to pick a path, and that's where some of those are probably more developed. At the high school level, I was very fortunate. I felt that our program did really well in terms of just the basic principles of everything from spelling to grammar and structure of how you're communicating. So I am really thankful for those things, because there are others that struggle with that more. And sometimes when they're I see that when my boss or people above me in a company, that's not one of their strong suits. They're great at what they do, but communication might not be one of their strong suits. That can make life challenging for people around them when you're trying to, just trying to communicate.
And I'm wondering if, given the volume of research and things, because you were in obviously a science track in college, if having more exposure to nonfiction texts and how to break those down and write responses to those, if that would have been beneficial.
Yeah. And I think back to, because I did a couple honors courses too, so those were probably the closest I got to more non-literature, usually still with a point, some sort of book, but some of those books were a little bit more difficult to work through, even just compared to either fiction or even just like a straight science-based book. Some of those experiences, I mean, I don't know if I had like a tremendous problem with it, but it was a little bit more work than how I would pick up any other fiction book and start working through interpretation or themes or whatever it might be. College probably got more to either be occasional fiction, nonfiction, kind of somewhere in the middle, and then a lot of science text. But
sure, a lot of articles, journals, things like that. Like not necessarily even books.
Yeah, not even really necessarily that, but yeah, like the journals, the reviews, all those type of things, the academic text.
And I think just understanding, so now when I see people come in and they're applying for jobs or we're working with interns, they're, again, in this agricultural setting or more of a field-based role, we've got people with very good mechanical aptitude, very great skills, but you could tell that in working with students, even at the high school and middle school level, there are kids who have no interest in that in school, and they're wired very differently. And so sometimes I see those applicants and they don't have some of those technical writing or communication side. That's not as big of a deal, but at the same time, if they can't communicate well to me, that I would know what's going on, that's a challenge as well. So the communication is so important on all levels. It's hard that if that's a weakness to overcome that.
And, another thing that comes to mind too is if you're frustrated or you're entering a heated conversation or something like that, that's an important concept too, is take a step back, maybe and hold the email for a day and, then come back and review it and send it.
You responded to a testy email immediately, your tone could be very different than if you do take a day. And do you have any tips of how do you kind of help, or is that part of clarity for you?
I think it's part of clarity, but it's also, we really work in a team environment, right? And I think one of the first things that I learned when I came to Great Plains years ago is, it's okay to cheat, if you will. Ask a team member to read it for you. It's not like you're taking a test, when you're in high school and your head's down, right? This is a team environment and we're collaborating. So I'll often either read emails for other team members or ask them to read mine and say, how does this come across to you? What's the message that you're receiving? And, if it's totally different than what I meant, then of course, sit and rewrite it and ask them to reread it again. The other thing that's super important too when you start your career is to make sure that you have a mentor. And, if it's not a team member that you rely on to help kind of review your messages, reach out to your mentor. And they are not probably in the day-to-day workings with you. And so they'll really be able to give you some objective feedback on how you're coming across with your tone.
Maybe even, I think a lot of the time, at least maybe more of the courses that I was involved in, it was a lot of more like research papers, especially looking at college more so. And I think you do lose some of those, even just like descriptive properties going forward now. I think, maybe those are some of those activities that I might have missed out on doing more of the science classes that now are actually becoming probably more useful to me.
My gut is basically that, like a 10-page research paper really isn't that helpful.
For me, no, not necessarily.
Doesn't have to do as much with writing as, just the whole eye contact, being able to carry on a lengthy conversation with someone. And as you're aware, with the technology and all the heads down, that's a challenge now. And we do see it with, newer people coming in. So that's one area that I think we need to continue focusing on. And I don't think it has to be necessarily that students practice, get up and giving a speech, but, just go out and have a conversation with another team member or classmate, another adult, so they're not intimidated when those situations come up. And then the second thing that is really big in our area, well, in all companies, I think these days, is diversity and inclusion. And so as you're communicating, as you're writing, really think about the words you're using. Some of the words that we use that aren't intended to be hurtful can be very hurtful. So I'll give you an example. I went through a training recently, and they talked about how, all the different types of diversity, whether it's, black, white, women, men, gay, straight, bipolar, people with anxiety, etc. And think about our weather and how our weather has been crazy. And so something in the past I might have said was, oh my gosh, our weather's so bipolar. I say that to someone who truly has a bipolar condition, and that's hurtful. And I don't mean it to be. I'm using it in a sense where our weather has been, up and down, right? And so we need to really think about some of those words and use more inclusive terms. And that's just something that's really, I think, it's very big in our company and in our industry. So I would just encourage kids to think about that.
But really, thank you so much for hopping on this morning. This is very useful information.
Absolutely. My sister teaches, and I love to be able to give back, because you guys do such a wonderful job preparing students to come to us.